This is a Rough Tiger production.
Surprise, surprise, surprise drop.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Yes, yes.
Hello.
Doing an audio interpretation of a Busby Berkeley musical. This is Dream Idiots. I'm Morris, that's Bryan, and this is a special surprise drop episode 92. How are you, Bryan?
Doing great. We decided to come back at you again a little faster than usual. This is kind of a good little, kind of not really a part two, but sort of a part two after what we dropped earlier in the week, which you will see here shortly.
That's right, and it goes along with what we did last time, which was our favorite book list, and something I failed to mention and wanted to because I get easily distracted. Was that our list was very, very white and
Yes.
very, very penis oriented. Lots of white guys and lots of that on our list. That did not play into this list that I made because I made both of these lists at the same time. Because today we're discussing our favorite banned books. And why are we bringing this up? Bryan, I mentioned the Moms for Liberty, and you're not quite familiar with this bunch, are you? You heard a little bit about them? Is that right?
I've seen the headlines. I thought they were one of the groups in Florida because it always seems like groups like this are always in Florida. So
They're
I've
from
seen
Florida.
some.
Yeah.
They are.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, I thought. Oh, okay. But they've since Florida spread elsewhere. Is that what's
Oh,
happening?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
And they're I mean they're fucking batshit with the same complaints that these groups always make about literature or about movies or about music, and it's comical, but I don't know the details, so go ahead.
Well, they're a right-wing group who really they really don't like books that address things like racial and gender inequality, LGBTQIA plus rights, and critical race theory. This bunch also doesn't like COVID-19 procedures such as masks and vaccine mandates. The good old Southern Poverty Law Center has labeled the group a far-right anti-government organization, and I believe they're taking legal action against the SPLC for that label. The Hamilton County chapter of Moms for Liberty recently quoted Adolf Hitler in its newsletter, The Parent Brigade, with the quote, "He who owns the youth gains the future." And just recently, as of last week, the November, and this is kind of to parallel my little case about the fella up here who was involved in the tailhook scandal, who got thumped in the last election. In the November 2023 school board elections, this group got shellacked in a variety of states. You can look up the numbers for yourself. Check out results in Iowa, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Minnesota with their list of books they want to get taken out of school shelves. And so someone will argue that, well, they're not banning it. They're just, limiting access to kids. That's how it starts.
Right.
That's how it starts. How does it end? It ends with throwing books into a fire in the middle of a public
Right.
square is how it ends.
Right. Famously and repeatedly.
Famously and repeatedly, it ends with people warming their fingers in hands and stomping their feet in front of a fire in the middle of a public plaza. So we thought we'd put together another list of 10 books, 5 each, of our favorite banned books. And strangely enough, a lot of our favorite books from last time were also on a banned book list.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got a little bit of variety here, I think. I get to start because it's an even numbered episode. So I'm going to start with this book, Bryan. Bryan, you ever read a book called The Things They Carried?
The Things They Carried. I've never even heard of it.
Oh, it's a great book. I read this in our beloved Professor Harry Haynes Vietnam War and Print and Television class in college. It was published in 1990 by a man named Tim O'Brien, Vietnam vet, and it is about his experiences in Vietnam. It's a brutal look at the life of an everyday guy out in the jungle in Vietnam, and it's called The Things They Carried. because he starts off with this list of literally the things they carried out in the field. It has been banned on the grounds of violence, animal abuse. If you've read the book, you know the chapter I'm talking about on animal abuse, and criticism of the Vietnam War. And in general, language, just foul language, because
Right.
it is set in wartime.
Mhm.
It's a brutal book. It's also a beautiful book, as is his other work, I believe, which is called Around the Lake. He's a great writer. I highly recommend Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. And I was talking to my kids about it, and I was really, really glad to see that the local high school here that my boys have attended and do attend, it's on the reading curriculum here at the local high school here, which is kind of neat that this book that I read in college is on the high school reading list here. So that's my first favorite banned book, Tim O'Brien's 1990, The Things They Carried.
Well, and we won the war in Vietnam, right? I think isn't that
To quote Kevin Kline, it was a tie.
right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. All right. So my first one I have, it's another author from last time is making an appearance on my list this week as well, or this for this episode. Maybe a lesser known book, but it was in the headlines here recently. Book came out in 2000, Shop Girl by Steve Martin. It was also made into a movie in 2005, starring Steve Martin, Claire Danes, and Jason Schwartzman. And I mean, it's a funny book. It is, the storyline in this thing is just a love triangle. Steve Martin plays the character he wrote, is an older, successful businessman. Schwartzman plays the younger love interest. It's a funny book. It's a fairly short book. But there is some sexual content in it, and it's definitely that sort of May December relationship thing that comes up. But it has been, I'm not quite sure whether this qualifies as a ban or not, but Collier County School District in Florida again has indicated that they have pulled 300 books, including Shop Girls, from the shelves there in order to limit exposure to books that mention sex, gender, pronouns, or reproductive health. And so it's, so whatever pulled from the shelves means it may not have been outright banned just yet, but apparently Steve Martin is making hay out of this, because just in the past few days he posted on Twitter, so proud to have my book Shop Girl banned in Collier County, Florida. Now now people who want to read it will have to buy a copy. And I'd be curious to see who's actually getting a spike in sales. I hope so. But again, this is just, it certainly does have some sexual content, but a funny book, pretty benign book, interesting and a worthy read, and people are freaking out about it again in Florida.
Yeah, that's the quickest way to get someone to buy something, right?
Yeah, that's the what is that, a meme, a joke? It's like, that's a very common. There's no such thing as bad press, right? So they're talking about the book that came out 22 years ago, and now it's being given a new life because you freaked out about it. Okay, you're working against your own aims, but great.
Oh, I remember people telling me I shouldn't go see Last Temptation of Christ. And what are you doing? I'm buying a ticket to go see Last Temptation of Christ.
Right.
You shouldn't buy Ice-T's Body Count. What are you doing? Well, I'm going to the record store so I can buy a copy of Ice-T's Body Count. Because that's what kids tend to do when they're told they can't do something. Is really, I shouldn't look at that. I'm going to look at that.
Yeah, well, that's the hard lesson that Tipper Gore apparently had to learn over and over and over again.
Number 8 on the list. Here's one that I'm sure most of our readers have read or seen in play or movie form, or read the book, Harper Lee's 1960 book, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, I'm guessing you've read this. I'm guessing you've probably seen the movie with Gregory Peck.
Seen the movie more than once, read the book more than once. It's really one of those seminal books that just, I know tons of people that love that book and then name their children and their pets after characters. I've known 2 or 3 Harpers, 2 or 3 Scouts. So
actually, now that you mention that, 2 of the folks we know here, one has a dog named Atticus, another has a dog named Scout. It's been banned mainly for language. specifically racist language. But there's also an undertone of sexual violence in this, because it's pretty clear that the young woman, well, I don't want to give anything away in case you haven't read it, but there is some sexual violence in this, accusations of sexual violence and actual sexual violence. Something happened to one of the characters in question. We don't quite know what it is. Well, we do as readers. We know exactly what happened to her.
Right.
And it involved a member of her own family. And one of my kids pointed out to me is that he doesn't like it because it's a white savior novel, that this character embodied by the white man has to come in and sort things out for everybody. And I can understand that. When I first read the book, when I was in middle school or high school, I certainly didn't see it that way, because it was 30 something years ago, right? When I read it for the first time, 40, oh my God, almost 40 years ago, when I read it for the first time. And I had the great pleasure to be in a theatrical production of To Kill a Mockingbird. And I remember having people come to see it, request to see it, and take notes on it before we performed it, as to how we were performing it, in what ways we were using the language. And we dropped the bombs in that play. And that was in 1989 when we did that. And to this day, I've wrestled with it. And do I feel right about what we did and how we did it? And much in the same way, this book has done that as well to this day. I have no comment upon its sequel, To Set a Watchman. I've not read it, but I do know that this is one of those books that, again, appears on many lists. And I think for many a time, it probably appeared on there because, in the words of Atticus Finch, it dares to have the temerity to suggest that Black people are somehow equal to whites, and that's one of the reasons it probably appeared on banned book list for many years.
Wait, you're telling me that Black people and white people are the same? Yeah, wait. Yeah, I mean, again, it's patently absurd that a book like this book would be banned for those reasons. But in light of how things have gone politically of late, it's not surprising that they still try, because they love the racism. All right, my next one is a book I believe you have read, J.D. Salinger, The Catcher in the Rye. It's
a requirement for being a white guy in America. You have to read Catcher in the Rye.
It is. Maybe it's a stereotype or something. I don't know. But I remember reading this book. I mean, it came out in serial form in the 40s, but it was novelized in 51. I'm sure was gained popularity. We read a bunch in the 60s and 70s, and that's the period of time when people were freaking out about it the most. The main character, rather famously, if you don't know, Holden Caulfield, is really sort of an icon for teenage rebellion. And this story, I mean, it takes place over a weekend, but he's basically narrating a number of recent life events. He's failing out of school. He's been cheating at school. He's helps a friend by writing a paper for them. He has a friend he thinks is gay, and he all the stuff he's doing what he wants, and he kind of doesn't really care. So it's very anti-establishment. There's drinking in it. There's some language in it. He flirts with girls. There may be a little bit of actual sex in it as well. And rather famously, he goes and he checks on the ducks in Central Park, and then and asks the cabbie, where do the ducks go in winter? Do they they migrate, or what happens to them? And rather famously, that's was it Mark David Chapman who actually did that, or was it John Hinckley who did that supposedly in reality, because they like this book? But they it's a quick read. I think it's a really important book. It certainly was important to me. I've read it several times and loved it, and always got things, good things out of it. And I totally get why right-wingers and establishment-minded conservative folks in the 60s would have had a problem with their kids reading it, because it really seems to advocate for being outside the norm, being outside the bell curve.
Yeah, and it does have this reputation of being the kind of book that people who like to shoot at other people read, what with Hinckley and Chapman. And my main critique of it is that if I pick it up and just flip through it, I will read the damn thing in a night, just because. And I've read it 2 or 3 times, maybe 4. But it's a book that just, it almost reads itself. And it also opens you to the world of J.D. Salinger, because I'm not sure it's his best work. I love 9 Stories and his other works, probably more than Catcher in the Rye. I just think he was a spectacular writer, and he's also a wonderful case study in people who want to be left the hell alone once they put their art out there and say, okay, here we go. Here it is, and leave me alone now.
Right.
And kind of lets the art speak for itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Number 6, I believe, on the list.
I think so.
All right, here's one. A Wrinkle in Time. Did you ever read A Wrinkle in Time?
I did read A Wrinkle in Time. I actually met the author one time.
Oh, how do you pronounce her name?
Madeleine L'Engle.
Thank you. 1963, because I was going to have to try to pronounce that, and I don't think I ever have. This is a book that really, really spoke to my imagination when I read it in elementary school. It has been banned on the basis of having supernatural and religious themes, including witchcraft. And I have never thought of it as a book about being supernatural. To me, it was always super science. The idea of folding time,
right?
The 4th dimension, and being able to move through time and space through a tesseract.
As Asimov adjacent, maybe a touch. I don't know.
I guess it proves that idea that if science gets far enough ahead of you, it appears to be magic rather than science.
Right.
But just lovely imagery in this book, like when all the children come out and are bouncing the balls in rhythm at the same time. Just the ultimate conformity. The creatures that help heal the children. Just a tremendously exciting book. And I read all the sequels to it. Swiftly Tilting Planet. I think there's 5 books total in the series.
Mm-hmm.
I know I read at least the first 3. Wind in the Door, or Wind in the Door. I'm not sure which one it is, but great imaginative work. And it's one of those books that I would want my kids to read them. They're just fantastic. And a book that also, like Catcher in the Rye, to me, just does not translate well to the screen. I've not seen the newest version, but it's one of those things that just so much of it is in your head that anything you do with it just can't. I don't think it can be done justice for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, it feels like that's one that they've tried on more than one occasion to try to do. And the reason I met her is for, way back in the 80s and into the early 90s, my mother ran a bookstore in San Antonio, Texas, and she
of course,
there,
right.
She came there and did a reading and signed books, and so I've long since gone, but I had a signed copy of that book once upon a time, but I couldn't tell you where it is now. All right, my next one. Where are we now? 4, 3, 5?
This is 5. Yeah.
5. The Great Gatsby. F. Scott Fitzgerald is I've probably only read twice, but it is a fabulous book. I think I was assigned it both in high school and in college, and it's just a cornerstone of really American literature, looking at life in the 1920s and just the money and the greed and the American dream, etc. I mean, it was banned off and on since it was originally published in 1925. It certainly has some sexual content in it, some allusions to gay sex as well, and so it's been a little bit problematic, from the get-go. I was actually pulled from an Alaska school, and the school board president there actually at one point told NBC News that it was being pulled to protect students. And he said, quote, "If I were to read these in a corporate environment, in an office environment, I would be dragged into an equal opportunity proceeding. The question is why this is acceptable in one environment and not another." Unquote. what an incredibly stupid question to ask with regard to literature. In a corporate environment, you have employees that you're responsible for, and a classroom is about education and literature and expanding the mind, and has nothing to do with job performance and those types of things. But nevertheless, it is a book that is constantly problematic, and books with sex in it, I really don't think you know there's so much sex in everything now. It's it may well be the case that anything that has gay sex in it just has to be obviously filtered out, because we can't let our poor sweet babies read this stuff. But again, definitely worth grabbing a copy of. Like Catcher in the Rye, it's a short read, but it's a good one.
It is. It's a great one, and I've said it here before. The first and best combination of opening and closing lines, I think, of any book in American literature. Number 4, Brian, is a Pulitzer Prize winning book.
Okay.
It originally appeared in serial form. Like you mentioned earlier, one of your ones was in serial form as well early on. I can't remember which one already, but it appeared in serial form from 1980 to 1991. Art Spiegelman's Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it appeared in Raw magazine. Have you ever read Mouse?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. A very powerful graphic novel that is not just about the Holocaust specifically, but it is also about the author coming to terms with his relationship with his father, who's a Holocaust survivor. So it's about the generational impact of the Holocaust and how people talk about it and how they relate to it. And it's a very, very powerful piece of literature. And I think to call it literature is perfectly acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are people who still look down on the graphic art form like this. It has been banned for profanity and violence and nudity, which just absolutely shocks me, because if you're not familiar with Mouse, all of the characters have been taken and you've used anthropomorphized animals to represent the Jewish people are mice, Nazis are cats, the Polish are pigs, for example. And there's a scene where some of the mice are being rounded up and taken to the gas chambers, and you see them naked, these human-shaped mice. And that's not titillating at all on a lot of different levels. That's
Right.
like looking at the nudity. If you're excited and titillated by the nudity in Schindler's List, you need help, right? I mean, it's devastating in what it does. And this is a devastating book. And if you've not read it, I highly recommend it. It is not something to read all at once. That's why I think it was effective in serial form. You want to read a little bit of it and put it down. It's also a tremendous piece of art and a tremendous piece of literature. And yes, it has been banned. Art Spiegelman's Mouse from 1980 to 1991, winner of the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, really? I had forgotten that.
Yep.
I think I've only read it once. I mean, it's a hard read. And
Yeah.
so yeah, maybe, books like that. Okay, I'll read it because I need to, but I probably will never pick it up again. Just because, it's just.
I've got a copy on my shelf. I can't tell you the last time I read it. I mean,
right.
it's a brutal read.
Right.
Absolutely brutal.
Absolutely. All right, number 3. Another one turned into a movie, but good in book form as well. Anthony Burgess, A Clockwork Orange.
Ooh.
So, I mean, it's obvious why this story, may have been subject to book bans, because obviously it has a boatload of violence in it. But when you compare this to any movies or any books that are out now, it's, again, I don't quite understand why this would have been such a touchstone. But the main character, Alex, in the movie, played by Malcolm McDowell. In the book, he's only 15 years old. He's a gang leader, and he is determined to, like gangs do, engage in violence. And there's a whole bunch of incredibly shocking scenes in the book. It's pretty, I wouldn't say quite 1984-ish in terms of being dystopian, but it's a little bit out there for violence, sexual violence, etc. And so the book got a lot of press, and lots of folks were in uproar about it. And then Stanley Kubrick's movie that came out in, I believe, 71.
70 or 71, yeah.
Yeah, thought, again, people thought with the movie that there was going to be tons of lookalike crimes, and it was going to create a spike of real life violence. And so again, tons of folks were freaking out, wanting the book to be banned, wanting the movie to not be distributed. And of course, in Texas, where guns are almost required now, and gun violence is freaking out, things like books and movies really don't create the same effect. And so all of those allegations or fears that this was going to cause people to freak out didn't happen. But it is a very, very compelling read. The movie actually came back out, was re-released in 2000. Great film as well. It's a tough film to watch. It is a film that will make you anxious. In the book, probably even more so, but worth putting on your radar screen.
Yeah, I can't watch it anymore. I can't do it. I can't.
Right. It's rough.
Yeah, it came out in 72, by the way, the film.
Okay.
Yeah, and I believe there were two different versions of the book. Wasn't the American version released without the final chapter?
Oh, I don't know. Really? I'm not sure.
I think it might have been released without the chapter, but yeah, I read the book a long time ago, and it's I think I've read some other Burgess stuff, but I don't really recall off the top of my head. But yeah, you can certainly understand why it's why it was. I mean, is it as bad as American Psycho in terms of its depictions of violence? Probably not, just in terms of graphic stuff. But man, it's a gut punch.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Number 2, my final contribution for the list, one of my favorite authors, and a guy by the name of Terry Hardage got me into this author. Kurt Vonnegut's 1969 novel Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a fantastic book with a character of a fellow by the name of Billy Pilgrim who has become unstuck in time. It was banned for language, sex, anti-religion, anti-war, and for homosexual characters and some homosexual undertones as well. It was basically Vonnegut's way to make sense of what he witnessed, which was the firebombing of Dresden. And
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, it's a brutal book, and it's the kind of book where if you read it going into it, knowing that, it's a very different reading experience from not knowing that. And Vonnegut can be deadly funny. Breakfast of Champions, Dead-Eye Dick. He's one of those great American writers that if you've got that kind of humor and sensibility, he's wonderful. But this is a study of what war does to people. And it is a brutal read, but it also came out at a very, very crucial time, 1969. 1968, we'd seen riots across the world with students uprising about their concerns for war and social change. And here comes this book that, again, pisses off the authorities, the establishment, and, Vonnegut. I quote Vonnegut to my kids almost on a weekly basis, where his famous quote of humanity can be summed up in one word: embarrassment. To be a human being is to be embarrassed. And I'm not sure there's anyone else that I've read that captures what it is to be human as much as Kurt Vonnegut. Wow. Even in his silliest stuff, there's always this undercurrent of dead seriousness under there. And Slaughterhouse-Five is one of those books.
Yeah, I've read it only once, and I think that's the only Vonnegut I've ever read. So I need to do more homework.
Dead-Eye Dick is choice. He's got so many good books. He's one of those guys that can be real daunting because you just don't know where to start. So
right. All right,
take us home, Brian.
Wrapping up the top 10. It seemed obvious that I need to pick this, to be the number one choice on the banned book list, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harry Beecher Stowe. This must be the book that's been, if not banned the most, banned for the longest period of time. Originally came out, I'm not sure in quite what form, prior to the Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln actually declared, upon meeting Harry Beecher Stowe at some point. So this is the little lady who started this great war. So Uncle Tom's Cabin is really the first window that anyone has ever given in America to this notion, and any white people are given to this notion that black people, slaves, are capable of humanity, and they have relationships, and they have love, and they have faith, and they have all the things that white people have in terms of how their brains work and how they function, and they have real fears, and they have goals, and they have hopes, and they have dreams, and they have and they're despondent, and they have all the problems that any human does. And this was the first window into that for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. The first year it was published, 300,000 copies were sold in the US. 1 million copies were sold in Great Britain. And it's a little bit of a book, a book that over time has gotten to be a little bit more complex, because this is the book that has the very first depiction of an affectionate, dark-skinned mammy type. The term pickaninny comes from this book in reference to black children, and the insult of calling someone Uncle Tom obviously comes from this book, making fun of someone who is a servant, still being dutiful to a white master. But it is I've read it a couple times, kind of like Mouse. It's not a fun read, but it is really historically just a vital tool that was used to combat slavery in the 19th century. It was the second most read book after the Bible. And
holy cow,
you really can't overstate the place that this book holds in American history and how vital it is. And then when you look at how things have gone in this country on more than one occasion with right-wingers and folks that really want to that seem to strive at suppressing anyone who's outside the norm. We've mentioned this now several times on this list, this idea that, wait a minute, if you're gay, you're a human being. If you're black, you're a human being. Really? And this book came out prior to the Civil War, and it seems like we are still fighting those same fights, and people are still freaking out about these same issues. Like, can't we all just get along? Come on.
Yet we have folks who are, wanting to teach both sides of slavery, the good points of being a slave. Just
right, though, the insanity that that Ron DeSantis came out with recently, basically trying to say that slavery did some good things, or slavery was a job training program, or that the Civil War was not about slavery, it was about representation without it's just ridiculous. The things, the lengths people will go to defend their backwards views.
Well, I'm not sure if I feel better or not after doing this list. I mean, we've had a chance to read these books, right? So that makes me feel better. I've read the majority of the books on both of I've read all the books on my list, and I've read most of the books on your list. So I feel pretty good about that.
If there's one piece of advice to be taken from this episode, if you in your community, if you wherever you are in the world listening to this, and you hear that your local state school board, local school board, county, there's a group, or there's some Karen getting up there blowing a gasket about some book, the first thing you do is you go to the nearest bookstore or go on Amazon and buy 10 copies of that book and just give it out to people, because if it's inflaming someone to that extent, it's got to be good. It's got to have some merit to it.
We have little miniature libraries in our neighborhood, just little
Oh, yeah, sure. Love those things.
slightly like they're, the size of maybe 5 or 6 mailboxes put together. They hold about maybe 15, 20 books. Just fill that up with banned books one day, just take everything out. Just
right.
1984, To Kill a Mockingbird, Wrinkle in Time. Just go down the list and do it. One of the reasons I also want to do this is because this is the time of year up here where it's nice to it's nice to get outside and walk around in the snow and do stuff like that and trudge around in the snow and do stuff, but it's also really nice to sit by the fire and read because it's starting to get cold up here. We've already had one snowdrop, and I've raked the entire lawn twice in 3 days because the leaves have finally said, "Basta, enough. We're finally falling."
We're done.
Yeah. So happy reading to everybody. What are you reading right now, Brian? Are you reading anything good right now?
I have a pile of books that, but I'm reading nothing. I'm so back. They have a huge backlog right now.
I'm kind of the same way, although I've started Frederick Forth's Day of the Jackal.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's pretty good so far. So
Sweet.
Yeah. All right, folks, keep reading. Go ahead, Brian. What were you gonna say?
I can totally see coming back and revisiting this issue. Maybe we come back with more banned book recommendations down the road. It's super simple to go on Google or whatever search app you like, and there are tons of good lists out there of the most commonly banned books, lesser known banned books of the last 3 or 4 years. There actually have been a few that have come out that are new or newish releases that are great books that definitely inspire the ire of those on the right. And so if Ron DeSantis hates it, it's got to be good. So pick up do some Googling, pick up those books and give them a once over.
What could that man possibly like book wise? I mean, seriously, what?
Holy moly.
I mean,
who knows?
I mean, what?
Party Boys?
Hey now. Hey.
I
like
love the Hardy Boys, but I read the Hardy Boys when I was in 6th grade.
Elementary, yeah,
5th grade, 6th grade. That's about his level of aptitude, I think.
I mean, he probably listens to Kenny G, right? I mean, it's
absolutely.
That's pretty insulting to Kenny G. Well, I don't know.
No, it's not.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, all right, folks. Happy reading.
Thanks for listening. Please on whichever app you're listening to, shoot us a review, give us 5 stars. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots. Drop us a note at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com if you want. Stay in touch, and thanks for listening. We appreciate it.
Yep, got a couple more surprise drop episodes coming for you, so be on the listen for those, and be good to each other.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong, Brian.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.